Arrival. As the sleek diplomatic shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, Ambassador Xyloth of the Galactic Federation fought to suppress his unease. The Arcturian had lived over a century, negotiated dozens of treaties, and seen the wonders of 1,000 worlds. Yet the idea of visiting the human military academy filled him with trepidation. "I fail to see the need for this physical excursion," Xyloth remarked to his aide, a young Balonian named Crix. "Surely in an age of instantaneous data transfer and full-sensory VR simulations, an actual visit is superfluous." Crix, engrossed in a holo-display of Earth's military history, barely glanced up. "The humans insisted, Ambassador. They said some things can only be understood through direct experience." Xyloth harumphed, his reptilian scales flickering with irritation. As the shuttle touched down on the Academy's landing pad, he peered out the viewport at the surrounding landscape. Squat, gray buildings stretched out in regimented rows, interspersed with obstacle courses and firing ranges. To Xyloth's eye, it looked primitive, even barbaric. The shuttle doors hissed open, and the Federation delegation disembarked, Xyloth in the lead. His nostrils flared at the unfamiliar scents: gun oil, sweat, trampled grass. A group of human officers stood at attention, their postures rigid and their expressions inscrutable. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with close-cropped silver hair, stepped forward. "Ambassador Xyloth, welcome to the Terran Strategic Command Academy. I'm Colonel Vance, your liaison for the duration of your stay." Xyloth extended a scaled hand, which Vance gripped with surprising strength. "Thank you, Colonel. I must confess, I'm curious as to why your government insisted on this visit. The Galactic Federation has existed for millennia without the need for such physical diplomacy." Vance's lips twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. "With respect, Ambassador, the Federation has existed for millennia without humanity. If we're to be allies, it's vital that we understand each other, not just our technologies and policies, but our philosophies and values. That's what this visit is about." As the colonel led the delegation towards a waiting ground transport, Xyloth couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. He had a feeling that, for better or worse, this visit would challenge everything he thought he knew about humanity, and perhaps about the Federation itself. "The tour begins." Colonel Vance set a brisk pace as he led the Federation delegation through the Academy grounds. Xyloth and his colleagues struggled to keep up, their legs unaccustomed to Earth's gravity. They passed training fields where cadets ran obstacle courses and firing ranges where the crack of gunfire split the air. "As you can see," Vance said, his voice carrying over the din, "we place a strong emphasis on physical conditioning and practical skills. In the heat of battle, a soldier's greatest asset is their own body and mind." Ambassador Talaxor of the Sirius Concordat, her blue skin flushed purple with exertion, spoke up. "But surely, in an age of autonomous drones and orbital strikes, the role of the individual soldier is diminished." Vance paused, fixing Talaxor with a penetrating stare. "On the contrary, Ambassador, the more advanced our technology becomes, the more vital it is that we remember the fundamentals. Drones can be hacked, comms can be jammed, but a well-trained soldier, they keep fighting, no matter what." As if to punctuate his point, a group of cadets nearby began sparring, their movements a blur of strikes, blocks, and throws. The aliens watched, transfixed, as the humans grappled with a fierce intensity. "Is this typical training?" Xyloth asked, unable to hide his shock. Vance nodded. "Hand-to-hand combat is a core part of our curriculum. You never know when you might find yourself without a weapon." The delegation exchanged uneasy glances. For species that had largely outsourced their combat roles to machines, the idea of such intimate violence was deeply unsettling. The tour continued, taking them through high-tech simulation rooms where cadets battled VR enemies, and medical bays where trainees learned field triage. But throughout, Xyloth couldn't escape the feeling that for all humanity's technological prowess, it was their sheer physical tenacity that set them apart. As they walked, Vance regaled them with stories of human soldiers who had survived insurmountable odds through sheer grit and willpower. A lone Marine holding off an enemy platoon, a downed pilot trekking miles through hostile territory. With each tale, the unease among the delegates grew. These humans seemed not just willing, but eager to throw themselves into the crucible of war. Xylot's mind raced as he tried to square this warrior ethos with what he knew of humanity, a species of artists, dreamers, and scientists. How could such dichotomous philosophies coexist within a single culture? Little did he realize that the greatest revelations and the greatest trials were yet to come. Differences in doctrine. As the tour wound through the Academy's vast campus, Ambassador Xyloth found himself drawn into a conversation with Colonel Vance about the evolution of warfare. The human spoke with a casual authority, peppering his explanations with historical anecdotes and strategic insights. And so, by the mid-22nd century, most nations had fully integrated their space and ground forces. Vance was saying, the old distinctions between Army, Navy, and Air Force became obsolete. A soldier had to be as comfortable in zero-G as in a foxhole. Xyloth nodded, his brow ridges furrowed in thought. And yet you still train your cadets in tactics that the Federation would consider antiquated. Trench warfare, close quarters combat, even hand-to-hand. Why? Vance paused, his gaze distant. Because, Ambassador, no battle plan survives contact with the enemy. Take the siege of Titan during the Jovian insurrection. The rebels had managed to hijack the colony's orbital defenses, making a conventional assault impossible. Our troops had to land covertly, infiltrate the habitat modules, and fight room to room until they could disable the anti-space guns. If they hadn't been trained in close-quarters tactics, he trailed off, the implication clear. Xyloth considered this. In the Federation, ground combat was practically unheard of. Conflicts were decided by naval engagements, cyber warfare, and economic sanctions. The idea of a modern army fighting hand-to-hand was almost laughable. As if sensing his skepticism, Vance continued. Or look at the Epsilon Eridani incident. An Eridani battle group, equipped with the latest Federation tech, went up against a single human frigate. They should have blown it out of the sky. But the human captain, he pulled a maneuver we call the Crazy Ivan. Killed his ship's power signature and let the momentum carry him right into the heart of the enemy formation. By the time the Eridani realized what was happening, it was too late. That one frigate took out half their ships before they even got a shot off. Xyloth's eyes widened. He remembered the incident. It had sent shockwaves through the Federation High Command. At the time, they'd attributed it to some kind of human technological trickery. But now, Crix, who had been listening intently, spoke up. So what you're saying is that human success in warfare comes not just from superior technology, but from superior tactics and training. And from a willingness to innovate, to take risks, Vance added. In battle, as in life, adaptation is everything. As if to illustrate his point, Vance led them to an observation deck overlooking a vast, zero-G simulation chamber. Inside, a team of cadets were engaged in a fierce mock battle, their movements graceful and deadly in the absence of gravity. This is the Valkyrie Run, Vance explained, a simulated boarding action against a hostile ship. The cadets have to navigate from one end of the chamber to the other, neutralizing enemy threats along the way. We change the scenario each time, so they never know what to expect. The delegation watched, mesmerized, as the cadets propelled themselves through the chamber with jets of compressed air, their weapons flashing. They moved with a fluid coordination, covering each other's advances and adapting seamlessly to each new challenge. For Xyloth, it was a revelation. The humans weren't just warriors. They were artists of war, their bodies and minds honed into lethal instruments. And yet there was a beauty to it, a purity of purpose that was almost spiritual. As the simulation ended and the cadets emerged, flushed with adrenaline and camaraderie, Xyloth found himself reevaluating everything he thought he knew about warfare and about the human spirit. But the true test, he would soon learn, was still to come. Psychological trials. The delegation's tour took a sobering turn as Colonel Vance led them into a nondescript building on the outskirts of the campus. "This," he said, his voice grave, "is the Scare House." Xyloth exchanged a confused glance with his colleagues. "Scare House." Vance nodded. "Psychological training. We simulate high-stress scenarios, CBR and attacks, sensory overload, interrogation. The goal is to inoculate the cadets against fear and mental breakdown." The aliens were silent as they entered the facility. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of sweat and fear. Muffled screams echoed from behind closed doors. In one room, cadets in protective gear were subjected to simulated chemical attacks, their skin blistering and lungs heaving as they struggled to complete their objectives. In another, trainees were bombarded with flashing lights and discordant sounds, their senses overloaded to the point of madness. But it was the interrogation rooms that truly chilled the delegation. Through one-way mirrors, they watched as cadets were subjected to hours of grueling questioning, their wills tested to the breaking point. "This is inhumane," Ambassador Talixer whispered, her face pale. Vance met her gaze unflinchingly. "This is necessary. In war, the enemy will not hesitate to use every psychological weapon at their disposal. Our soldiers must be prepared." Xyloth watched as one cadet, a young woman with fiery red hair, resisted her interrogator's mind games with a steely resolve. Even as her body shook with exhaustion and stress, her eyes remained defiant. "How do they endure it?" he asked, almost to himself. "By learning to control their fear," Vance replied. "By understanding that pain is temporary, that the mind is stronger than the body, and by leaning on each other. No soldier fights alone." As if on cue, the red-headed cadet was released from her interrogation. As she stumbled out of the room, her squad mates were there to catch her, their faces etched with empathy and pride. Xyloth realized that this, perhaps even more than the physical trials, was the true strength of the human military. This bond, this unbreakable trust in one another. It was a concept alien to the Federation, where soldiers were cogs in a machine, interchangeable and expendable. But here, among the humans, each warrior was valued, nurtured, forged into something greater than themselves. As the delegation emerged from the Scare House, blinking in the harsh sunlight, Xyloth couldn't help but feel a grudging respect for these cadets. They were facing their deepest terrors head-on, and emerging stronger for it. But even this, he would soon discover, was only a prelude to the true crucible that awaited them. The crucible. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of red and gold, Colonel Vance gathered the delegation in a briefing room. His face was grave, his posture tense. "Ambassadors," he began, "thus far, you've seen the training and tactics that make the Terran Strategic Command the finest fighting force in the galaxy. But there is one final trial, the ultimate test of a soldier's mettle. We call it the Crucible." The room was silent, the aliens leaning forward in rapt attention. "It is a tradition as old as war itself," Vance continued. "A trial by fire, where cadets must prove their worth not just as warriors, but as leaders, as comrades, as human beings." He tapped a control panel, and a holographic display sprang to life, depicting a harsh, unforgiving landscape. This is Hades VI, a training ground designed to simulate the most hostile environments imaginable. For the next 3 days, a squad of cadets will be dropped on this planet with minimal gear and no outside support. Their mission: to survive, to adapt, and to overcome, by any means necessary. Xyloth felt a chill run down his spine. This was no mere training exercise. It was a gauntlet, a test of the human spirit itself. "You will have the rare privilege of observing this trial," Vance said. "But I'd warn you, what you are about to witness will challenge everything you thought you knew about the limits of endurance and the bonds of brotherhood." Hours later, the delegation found themselves in a small observation craft, orbiting the blighted surface of Hades VI. On screens around them, helmet cam feeds showed the progress of the cadet squad as they navigated the planet's treacherous terrain. They watched as the humans trekked across blistering deserts, their skin cracked and bleeding, their lips parched with thirst. They watched as they forded toxic rivers, the corrosive waters eating through their protective suits. They watched as they scaled jagged cliffs, their fingertips torn and bloody, their muscles screaming with fatigue. But most of all, they watched as the cadets relied on each other, their bond growing stronger with each trial. When one fell, another was there to pick them up. When one despaired, another was there to lend strength. They were not just soldiers. They were brothers, bound by an unbreakable code of honor and sacrifice. "This is unbelievable," Ambassador Talixer murmured, her eyes wide with wonder. "How do they keep going? What drives them?" Vance, his eyes never leaving the screens, replied softly. "Purpose, Ambassador. The knowledge that they are part of something greater than themselves. That their actions, their very lives, have meaning. It is a powerful thing, the human spirit. It can endure anything, overcome anything, as long as it has something to fight for." As the trial reached its climax, the cadets found themselves besieged on all sides, their resources dwindling, their hope fading. But even in their darkest hour, they did not surrender. With a final defiant roar, they charged headlong into the fray, their weapons blazing, their hearts alight with a fierce, indomitable will. And against all odds, they emerged victorious, their bodies battered but their spirits unbroken. As they stood atop a rocky promontory, the harsh winds of Hades VI whipping at their faces, they raised their fists in a solemn salute. In that moment, Xyloth understood. This was the true strength of the human race, not their technology, not their tactics, but their unbreakable unity, their unwavering courage in the face of insurmountable odds. It was a revelation that would shake the very foundations of the Galactic Federation. Revelation. As the battered cadets emerged from their dropships, their faces haggard but their eyes alight with a fierce pride, the Federation delegates found themselves at a loss for words. The scene before them defied all logic, all preconceptions of what constituted military strength. These humans, these mere children by the standards of their own long-lived races, had endured trials that would have broken the most hardened warriors of the Federation. They had faced death, not with state-of-the-art weapons or impenetrable shields, but with nothing more than their wits, their training, and their indomitable will. Ambassador Xyloth approached the cadet leader, a tall, broad-shouldered youth with a face etched by hardship. I do not understand," the Arcturian stammered. "Why do you do this? Why subject yourselves to such suffering, such risk?" The cadet met his gaze, his eyes burning with a fire that Xyloth had never seen before. "Because, Ambassador, this is what it means to be human. To strive, to fight, to never yield, even in the face of impossible odds. It is in our blood, our bones. It is what has driven us to the stars, and what will keep us there." Colonel Vance, standing proud and tall beside his charges, nodded in agreement. "The crucible is more than just a test of skill or endurance," he said. "It is a forge, a crucible in the truest sense of the word. It takes the raw metal of a soldier and shapes it, tempers it." Departure. As the Federation delegation prepared to depart from the Terran Strategic Command Academy, a somber mood hung over the proceedings. The sights and revelations of the past days weighed heavily on the alien ambassadors, challenging long-held beliefs and igniting heated debates. Ambassador Xyloth found himself deeply unsettled. The raw physicality and emotional intensity of human warfare stood in stark contrast to the calculated, almost clinical nature of conflict in the Federation. He couldn't help but wonder if the sterile, detached approach of his own people had led to a kind of stagnation, a loss of the fire that seemed to drive humanity forward. Others, like Ambassador Talaxor, voiced concerns about the potential destabilizing effect of humanity's rapid ascent on the galactic stage. A species so young, so unpredictable, and yet so powerful, she mused. What happens when they turn their gaze outward, when their thirst for challenge and conquest can no longer be contained by their own planet? These fears found a voice in Ambassador Crix, Xylot's young aide. "We have seen what they are capable of," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Their tenacity, their adaptability. What if they decide the Federation is holding them back? What if they become not our allies, but our rivals, or worse?" Colonel Vance, ever present and inscrutable, seemed to sense the unease rippling through the delegation. As they gathered for a final diplomatic exchange, he fixed them with a piercing gaze. "I know what you're thinking," he said, his voice low and steady. "You're wondering if you've made a mistake, if inviting humanity into your grand galactic community was an error in judgment." The ambassadors shifted uncomfortably, some averting their eyes. Vance pressed on. "Let me be clear. Humanity's strength, our resilience, our indomitable spirit, these are not threats to the Galactic Federation. They are gifts. The same qualities that allow our soldiers to triumph against impossible odds are what drive our scientists to cure diseases, our explorers to chart new frontiers, our diplomats to forge lasting peace." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Yes, we are warriors, but we are also dreamers, builders, healers. And above all, we are allies. The Federation's strength is not diminished by humanity's rise. It is enhanced by it." Xyloth, moved by the Colonel's words, stepped forward. "Colonel Vance, Christopher, I came here with doubts, with prejudices, but you have shown me the error of my ways. Humanity's spirit is not something to be feared, but celebrated. The Galactic Federation is stronger with Earth at its side." Vance smiled, a rare display of warmth breaking through his stoic demeanor. He extended a hand, which Xyloth grasped firmly. "The future is uncertain," the Colonel said, "but one thing I know. The cadets you see before you, and the countless others like them, they are humanity's future. And with them at the vanguard, I have no doubt that future will be one of greatness." As the delegation boarded their shuttle, the Academy grounds receding below them, Xyloth found his mind racing with possibilities. The visit had not quelled his fears completely, but it had kindled a new hope, a belief that perhaps, in this chaotic and dangerous galaxy, humanity and the Federation needed each other more than either had realized. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges and uncertainties, but with the strength of the human spirit and the wisdom of the galactic community united, Xyloth dared to believe that no obstacle would prove insurmountable. A new era was dawning, and he, for one, was eager to greet it. The end.